All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind. But we're going to have a show.
Wow, Kim, what are you doing? Yeah, well, that's why you, need to know. Wait a minute. Kim, what are you doing? Wait a minute, what's going on? Well, that's why you, need to know. Wait a minute.
Well, I can see this is starting out well.
Is that coming from me or coming from you?
I think it's coming from you.
No, that's bad.
Yeah, making girls. Yeah. Wow. Well, we've stopped that. Yeah. This is the Mark Thompson Show. Mark Thompson is muted. We've stopped that. Yeah. This is the Mark Thompson Show. Mark Thompson is muted. We've stopped. It almost sounds like YouTube is open. This is the Mark Thompson Show. You have it sounds like YouTube is open. You have an incident of YouTube open on your computer. Oh, thank goodness.
That could be. It could be the YouTube thing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think you have YouTube running and we're running. Well, good morning, everyone. This is amazing, and it's a wonderful Tuesday. It's going to rain today.
Can you hear me now or not?
I can hear you. You sound wonderful and beautiful.
It's an outrage what's happened here. All right. Fritz, this is awful. I've got an in-studio guest. Normally, it's not this messy. It's messy every day, but it's not this messy. Fritz and I came up, the guy you're about to meet, we came up in broadcasting together. He was already like a broadcasting professional by the time I hit the scene, but he and I worked alongside each other, and he is like one of my dearest friends and an insanely successful broadcaster, comedian. It's such a pleasure to have him. I'm bringing you into the mix now, Fritz. The great Fritz Coleman, everyone, is with us in the show.
I thought you were getting feedback from my hearing aids. That happens occasionally.
I want to welcome you as I just have, but I also want to share with you, I'm going to kind of just bring you into the mix here as we go around the horn on some news and some things that are going on. Then I want to talk about this TV special, which is really the reason you're here. Where it's funny, this TV special I think will be of particular interest to my audience. Because we have some older boys and girls. I myself am an older boy or girl. And so anyway, you have a TV special coming up. Is it on yet now?
It's on. It dropped last Friday.
What's it called?
Unassisted Living.
Unassisted Living.
It's for old people and their parents.
Okay. Kim, can you put the Unassisted Living banner up, or maybe you can find it online and we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be really great. But it's so cool to have you, and then we'll talk about a little bit about aging and some of what you're doing. I do want to tell everybody what's happening today. The normal Tuesday offerings. David Cay Johnston will be in, the Pulitzer Prize winner. We'll talk about the Supreme Court revelations, which keep on coming. I mean, basically, these guys just run amok, and they're really not held to account. And there is no real manner institutionally by which they can be held to account. So we'll get to that a little bit later. At the bottom of the hour, it is another day of Talk to a British Guy as we lead up to the coronation of the new king. So we will have a special British guy for you to listen. He is... Oh, there also was a major announcement regarding our Thursday meetup. Kim, myself, Albert, I think, is going to pop in. Tony as well, if we can possibly manage it. Might even have another guest or two. We're all meeting with you, those of you who have signed up and registered, for an off-air happy half hour. We've decided we're going to make it 45 minutes, but we're still calling it the happy half hour. Yeah. It's a meet and greet with our crew. It is Thursday evening, 7 to 7:30. It's a private off-air Zoom meetup. We'll be able to play music. We'll be able to do a lot of stuff we can't do on the show. You can ask anything. You can make it as serious as you want, as heavy as you want, as light as you want. All of you, this is the reason we've limited the spots. Everybody gets to contribute. everybody gets to participate in the conversation. Only 15 spots are available. Now, there are 15 signups already, but there are only, I think we have 3 that still have not, who said, I'm interested, but I'm not sure I can do it, blah, blah, blah. So if you can do it, you get those spots. But to register, you have to go to the markthompsonshow@gmail.com. Leave your name, email, and phone number, and each spot is $75 because we're trying to raise money to support the show. So themarkthompsonshow@gmail.com, your name, your email, your phone number. That way we can get you all vectored in for the happy half hour, which will actually be 45 minutes with the entire crew, and you can speak about anything. Bring up anything you want, and we'll answer any and all questions. So we're looking forward to that. Again, as I say, I think you legitimately could see three spots still open. Even though there are people who have expressed interest, we just want to ice it today. So if you have an interest in joining us, we'd love to have you join. That's the happy half hour. It's Thursday, and again, it's the markthompsonshow@gmail.com. The thing is, Fritz, we're completely crowd-funded. So once in a while, we have to do things to, that are fun, but that also raise money. There it is. Fritz Coleman, unassisted living.
I think you should make it a live event like at a Cheesecake Factory so people can meet you and touch you.
I would love to do that, actually. And we've talked about that. But,
people will have to fly in from other parts of the country.
Exactly. We've got people from all over the place. We can't really find a place that geographically works. But, Fritz, it's on. The Writers Guild strike. You are a writer. You know a little something about this. You're a comedy writer. And you know a lot of people in production and who are also comedy writers, who are on series and all the rest. It's a brutal fact that the world of streaming has busted down the quotes and completely upended the way that writers are typically compensated.
And the sad irony of that is that some of the most creative, both film and television, is on streaming now. It's the most in-depth and the most creative and the most unfettered by the typical conventions of network television. It's really sad. I heard, I don't know who it was, but I was listening to CNN in the car, and they had one of the writers who was beginning to set up for the picket lines, and he said one of the executives at Paramount or Universal had made $250 million in 1 year last year, which is exactly the amount it would take to pay off what the Writers Guild is asking for both the East Coast and the West Coast to solve this problem, which I thought was very sad.
Yeah, no, you're right.
He said they've turned writers' rooms, they want to do away with writers' rooms completely. They want to make it what they call gig work, which is you never know if you're going to have a job. You do a writing assignment and hope you get hired again, which in a creative industry seems to be a really bad way to run it.
Well, they have what they're called these mini rooms. So it's not the full writing staff and it's not the full commitment. A smaller number of writers beat out episodes and story arcs. And in so doing, they essentially create the series and do all the heavy lifting associated with the writing. But they're only compensated for this little session that they're doing. They're not given a piece of all those episodes that they've written. And this is the other key thing about streaming. We love it so much, and as Fritz says, some of the the best stuff is on streaming now because streaming has become sort of the default way in which we get a lot of this entertainment. But there is really no residual associated with streaming. And so all the ways that writers used to really be able to make a living because your show's in reruns, your show continues on, it has a half-life that's really long. It now has that, but it's in the streaming world where you're not getting compensated.
And it seems from a business standpoint where this is the industry shooting itself in the foot. Because if you don't have the script, you don't have the content, you don't have the show.
That's so true. I mean, you can't do anything without the writers. So the strike started at midnight. There's going to be the beginning of, protest lines and all the rest. It was 15 years ago. You remember it. I remember it when the entire town closed down, essentially. You've got all the caterers and the other businesses that you don't think about, the props, the They always talk about the cleaners, yeah.
There's a great show about that on Netflix called Broadway Rising, which was about what happened during the pandemic when Broadway shut down and all the peripheral industries, as you describe, the caterers, the delis, the florists that all ate it for the whole 2 years. And it was a very personal story. And it's sad. It's going to happen right here, right in our neighborhood.
No, it's true. And the other thing I would say is a lot of these businesses are just getting on their feet after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's, we're asking industries that have already taken a body blow to, take another one. Again, what's happened is the writers have seen their world go from a really good living to kind of a gig day rate, as Fritz was saying, a gig economy, where you're getting a day rate. Well, that's just not the way the Writers Guild has always interacted with Hollywood. And the minute that streaming came on, then we'll move on to another topic, but the minute streaming came on, you saw the way the studios were handling it. They were essentially stonewalling the writers on any streaming revenue. So
they're getting killed in residuals just the way they got killed when cable came out and content went to cable. The same thing happened. They got a fraction of what the residuals were for their network, their broadcast work.
And the last thing I'll say is that, and I've said it a few times here, they don't like to talk about it, but now it's out there as a front and center issue. AI and the creation of scripts. Imagine watching a series, watching a movie that was written by AI, and then all you need is a guy like Fritz, like a comedy writer or somebody to do polish on the dialogue. You add some jokes, you add some stuff. The AI doesn't quite make it really fit, and it's ready for prime time. So AI, they're trying to limit the ways in which AI can be used by studios and can be part of the creative process. What's the grim reality here is that the studios are stonewalling them again all the way. I mean, there really is no negotiation. There's this, they talk about the fact that, they're negotiating into the night. When, from what I'm learning from those involved in these negotiations, there is almost no dialogue going on. The studios are just standing firm. And that's one of my issues with media mergers. Fritz, these companies have become so enormous that you don't have any competition anymore. You can't make a deal anywhere because there are really only a handful of companies that are there to make a deal. So it could be a long time, I guess, is the point. So that's the deal on the writers' strike in Hollywood.
The Mark Thompson Show.
The J.P. Morgan takeover of First Republic continues, and while it's happening, it has created some nervousness across the banking system. I suspect that most of our listeners don't have, more than the $250,000 that will likely be backstopped by the FDIC, but still, what's happening is there's an uneasy relationship now between the banking world and the government, because the government's being called upon to backstop more and more. So that's something to keep an eye on. But essentially, First Republic's right in the city of San Francisco. And it's the second biggest bank failure in U.S. history.
So is the SVB situation and the First Republic situation connected? Because they're both Bay Area banks.
Yeah. I think well, you could say the run might be connected, right? In that, what happened with the SVB was I think there were a bunch of those tech bros who sort of began to say, "Hey, get your money out of there," and you saw it happen. Even Peter Thiel's crew, although Thiel left his money in, Peter Thiel's crew got their money out. So that started a run there, and then I think there was an insecurity about where all the money was, and of course, First Republic had a lot, didn't they, Kim? They had a lot of very high-end, heavily invested, not even institutional money. I mean, personal money. Am I right about that? Kim, are you still with us? No? Kim's moved on.
No, let me pop myself in. I think what happened is that what you were mentioning about Silicon Valley Bank touched off, let's look at other banks right? And found that the First Republic Bank then was on shaky ground as well. So it didn't take long. And I think there was one other bank in New York. So now you have 3 banks that have failed that are
Signature Bank.
connected. Yeah,
Signature,
Signature
exactly.
Bank. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all because like, once you have a problem with one bank, let's start looking around and see who else isn't firmly, able to do business.
But these are wealthy private investors at First Republic, also at SVB. So SVB, they began to pull their money out en masse, right?
Yeah,
Then you had that anxiety
niche
that
banks, right?
Yeah.
Like that don't really apply to everyone because not a lot of people. I remember Station X, we had to do the commercial for First Republic Bank for years. I must have done it a million times. It was First Republic Bank, personal banking, business banking, wealth management. At First Republic Bank, it's a privilege to serve you. It's for the rich of the rich, right? I mean,
that's great.
it's not for the Joe Blow who's just gets a regular paycheck. This is for people that have a lot of money.
Right.
Well,
exactly.
thank good, Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan Chase wrote in there to stop this one, so the government responsibility will be less. But they were talking yesterday about this maybe being a harbinger of the end of regional banks. And to go back to your original point about there being like 2 banks in America because, they're too big
mergers,
to fail
yeah.
because of the mergers.
Yeah, harbinger's a ding word, by the way.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, congratulations.
I don't even know what that means.
We ding like SAT type words here.
Okay.
So anyway, let's talk about your special. All right.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Fritz Coleman is here. Fritz is a comedian, and you've done these one-man shows before. I remember you did a few of them on PBS prior to this.
Yes. I found a niche for myself, and I made up this title. It's called the Single Topic Monologue.
Right.
So I've done a series of those. The first one that you mentioned that was on PBS was called It's Me, Dad. It was about being a single father and about revealing the truth about myself to my children before I got too old to remember everything and putting it on a videotape and stashing it in a safe deposit box. And then when they were old enough to hear the sordid details of my life, they could watch the tape. And the second one I did was about divorce called The Reception. And then I did one about the news business that I was in for 40 years called Tonight at 11. And then I did one about aging called Defying Gravity. And this one I've currently done that's on Tubi now for free is called Unassisted Living, which is about getting really old. I passed the threshold. I'm now with Medicare and Social Security, and I'm far beyond that. Now it's just a survival technique. And I had a lot of fun doing it. And regardless of how old you are, if you haven't reached that old threshold yet, you'll still have fun with it. I talk about COVID and about having grandchildren and about having children and having children having to do school on Zoom during the pandemic and little physical aspects of the aging process that nobody likes. You'll just have fun with it. Because if you haven't been through it yet, you will.
What? What is the? You may not be able to show too much of this special because we'll get struck there. We just have a little bit of your open. What is when it comes to aging? What is the thing that you would tell those who are not yet at the point where let's say 10 years behind or whatever? As you call back to them and going, hey, just be prepared for this.
Right. Well, I think, I don't know if this is a female trait, but it's a male trait where you promise yourself for the first 3/4 of your life that you will never be like your father. You will never repeat your father's bad habits or his stuck in the past frames of mind. And then as time goes along, it's genetic, it's subliminal. You find yourself reacting to the world exactly the same way your father did. And I have some of the same physical characteristics of my father. I snore like my father did. I don't snore continuously like a Harley Davidson rumble. I snore in spurts like that. And the cat sleeps on my chest. And when I do that, the cat levitates. And anyway, little tiny things that you swore would not happen to you because you're not your father, then you find out you are your father. And it's the genetic continuum of life.
Ever since I've known you, which as I say has been decades now, you were a runner. And really, you enjoyed it, obviously. And as you get older, I don't know about you, but and I was never a runner, but just for me to run from like the house to the car, I start to feel my knees or whatever.
Yeah.
Have you had to modify your
Oh,
regimen?
yes. I don't run anymore. Now I ride an exercise bike in front of the TV as I watch great courses on Amazon Prime. Yeah, I'm getting smart. I'm not necessarily getting in better physical shape, but I'm getting smarter. No, but of course you do. Listen, when you hit about 60 or 65, the hubcaps start coming off. Little things happen, and you can't control them. For instance, you get up in the morning and you notice you still have the same dents in your ankles that you had the day before, because your skin, it does not have the elasticity to recover as quickly. So there are little physical manifestations of aging.
By the way, that you just described, though, is immensely. Why does that hit so hard?
I don't.
It
because
does.
your circulation dies.
No, but I mean, the psychological hit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh my God, why? You just these physical manifestations. It would be easier if we just kind of all went along and then one day, bam. Nothing changed, and then one day, boom, you buy it.
Yeah.
But instead, you see the deteration. You feel the deterioration.
It's a slow build. It's like the warning light, and
Exactly.
it just happens, and you don't think it's going to happen, but it happens.
I didn't realize that I had missed your special about being TV news. Fritz he's a Lifetime Achievement Award winning Emmy and all this sort of thing. He was in local news for a long time. And you really, you hit the ball so hard there. Although I always felt, and I really don't mean to be presumptuous with this, but I always felt your real thing is this massive amount of creativity you have when it comes to comedy and writing and all this kind of thing. And so I always saw, and again, pardon me, because then you're so accomplished. You did really well.
You're one of my close friends.
But I saw the media thing that you were doing, the news thing. I was like, I don't know.
But it was, I came out here to be a comic, and oddly enough, and real meteorologists hate this, but I was hired at the Comedy Store. I was doing a show at the Comedy Store, and the news director and his wife were there, and I got this job. So I really would have felt like I sold my soul if I had to stop the comedy when I did the weather. I was the main weatherman at NBC in Los Angeles for 40 years.
Yeah.
But I continued. I was doing 2 or 3 shows a week, so it wasn't that I gave up my passion. What I was really doing was giving my kids a stable life.
Sure.
And being able to have some continuity in my life, that when you go on the road as a mid-level comedian, and you make $700 and spend $600 on transportation, working at Giggles in Cincinnati and coming back with $50 left, you can't do that with kids.
Right. Yeah.
So I was blessed on many things.
Do you think this is interesting? This is from Peace. She says Clint Eastwood says he doesn't let the old man in. Do you think there is a quality of that where you just sort of never, if you somehow just live in denial, as best you can?
You can live in denial if you're not trying to write material about it every day. Then you have to address it head on. And my feeling is if you just walk through the middle of it and the whole thing, I'm an observational comic. They're not setups and punchlines and stuff. It's describing common experiences that maybe other people would not put in their own words. And so this is a rich territory for me. And the reason why they bought this special on Tubi was because I was addressing a very underserved demographic in stand-up, and that is older people. First of all, for content, talking about what it's like to be old. Second of all, people could love Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock, who are the best in the business without question. But there are people that are older people that just can't be hammered by the language for the whole thing. It doesn't bother me, but it bothers old people. So I work relatively clean, and I address an older demographic, which was sort of this niche that Tubi found enticing to put on their streaming service.
Well, I love that you've got the special. Again, it's on Tubi. Your other specials are on YouTube. Where can I go back and get those?
There are a couple of chunks of them on YouTube. The one-person show that you talked about first, which was my first one, called It's Me, Dad, was purchased by Public Television, and because it was about fatherhood, they aired it every year for 7 years on Father's Day at KCET, which was the public television station in Los Angeles.
I see. Yeah.
So I don't know if that one's available, but the chunks of the other ones were available.
Google Fritz. You'll love it. It's a great ride. Fritz Coleman. And again, the new one is Unassisted Living. It's on Tubi. Fritz, love you. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you, my friend, for letting me talk about it.
Please come again. I love it. We'll talk about getting old.
Before we let him go, I just
Yes.
wanted to note this. When I did a Google search for Fritz Coleman's unassisted living, I found this: Coleman Fields assisted living.
You know, if I have that
You got a
is
piece of that.
hysterical.
Wow,
Yeah.
you had a piece of that.
See, I would actually name if I had a facility, I would name it that. That
Yeah,
sounds cool.
Coleman Fields.
Fields.
I love
Coleman.
it. Yeah, it sounds like a place they play baseball. All right, pal. Good to see you.
Thank you, my
All right,
friend.
Fritz Coleman.
Thanks, Tim.
The Mark Thompson Show.
It was great. I loved it.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
You cannot say you love your country.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Stay at home and get baked.
How about that? Is he great? Love that Fritz. Good stuff. Still to come, we talked to a British guy. And it's funny, the British guy we'll talk to today, I don't know if there's I feel like there's a audio in the background coming through. Maybe I'm wrong. See you, Fritzy. Thank you. The British guy we're going to speak with today is a really interesting guy with first-hand stories of the royals. He has interacted with the royals, so it just adds a little something to the mix. As you know, in the lead up to coronation, some people are really excited about it. Some people don't care. Some people are disgusted by it. The colonial empire, a reminder of the blue bloods in Britain. I don't know where you are on the scale, but we're just taking it as an opportunity to talk to different British people. And yesterday, it was a great conversation with Aidan Pickering, whose father had been knighted, and he himself a distinguished journalist. His dad a distinguished journalist and publisher all the way into his 90s, I think, when he passed away. And today, there is also a television producer, journalist, and a terrific personality. Phil Fairclough will join us in just a few moments. So that's still to come.
How do you know so many British people? What's going on?
I know just enough in the way of British people to cover us for the week, I think.
That's pretty impressive.
There is a story out of the world of artificial insemination that is truly bizarre. And I think I want to share it quickly and then Kim's news. Is that cool?
Yeah.
A Dutch court, after we got off the air on Friday, a major announcement, ruling was put into place. Yeah. And it was a
major announcement.
No, it was not from our show. It was not from our show. It was from the Dutch court. And here's what it was. A guy who had fathered between 500 and 600 children around the world was ordered by a Dutch court to stop donating sperm. He's a 41-year-old Dutchman. He is now forbidden to donate more semen to clinics. He could be fined 100,000 euros, $110,000 per infraction. The court also ordered the man to write to clinics abroad, asking them to destroy any of his semen that they have in stock, except doses reserved for parents who already had children by this guy as a result of his sperm donation.
Can't stop, won't stop.
They say that the man's continued donations violate the right to a private life of his donor children. Their ability to form romantic relationships hampered by fears of accidental incest and inbreeding. That's how prolific these donations are.
What do you think moves someone to do that? I mean, is it, somehow I want my genes to, be more prominent than everyone else's?
I think there's a bit of ego in it, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you need a court order to stop the guy, then I think there's a bit of ego in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, it was in 2017, he was banned from donating to Dutch fertility clinics. All right. So there was a ban in place. He'd already fathered over 100 children, they think, that they know about. But back then, he continued to donate abroad. And he donated to a Danish sperm bank continuously because they were operating internationally. So he was still kind of, I think when you're that committed to getting your sperm out there, then yeah, you're right, Kim. It's a bizarre kind of ego play.
Something's awry there.
Yeah. And he continued to offer himself as a donor on sites matching prospective parents with sperm donors. Sometimes he used a different name. So, yeah, I mean, he's essentially almost a genetic terrorist. You know, it's a weird thing. He's fathered over 500 children around the world, and now he's ordered by a Dutch court to stop donating sperm. Anyway, that's the latest on that. All right, talk to a British guy. Phil Fairclough next as we continue after Kim's news. Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
On the Mark Thompson Show, I'm Kim McAllister. Let's begin with migrants coming over the border. More than 1,500 soldiers or troops may soon be headed to the southern border. The Biden administration is looking at ways now to address concerns about a surge of illegal immigration next week. A public health rule called Title 42, which had been used to expedite deportations, is set to expire on May 11th. Meanwhile, the governor of Texas is vowing to keep sending busloads of illegal immigrants to both New York and Chicago. Greg Abbott says if the city's liberal mayors don't like it, they need to take it up with President Biden. And as Mark had mentioned earlier, yes, we've now got a writer's strike on our hands. The Hollywood writer's strike expected to have a big economic impact. The union and the studios failing to agree on a new 3-year contract, and the Writers Guild of America announced the strike, effectively halting most productions. Aside from the obvious impact felt in the Los Angeles and New York states, including New Mexico and Georgia, that have seen a production boom, will feel the effect of lost revenues as well. The Secretary of State is now denying any role in the Hunter Biden Russian disinformation letter. Have you heard about this? It's a letter signed by 51 intelligence officials claiming the Hunter Biden laptop story had the markings of a Russian disinformation campaign. Last month, a former CIA official told the House Antony Blinken was behind the letter. That's a charge Blinken is denying this week. And
you're going to hear so much about Hunter Biden in the months ahead. It's just going to be like, it's going to be it's as though it will be as though he's running, which is just bizarre.
The Supreme Court. Well, ethics needed, perhaps? Yes. The Senate Democrats are now calling for the Supreme Court ethics reform amid recent controversies among justices. During a congressional hearing today, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin said the highest court in the land should not have the lowest ethical standards. The hearing follows reports that Justice Clarence Thomas received undisclosed vacations and gifts from Republican donor Harlan Crow for years. And lastly, we've got these Bud Light sales that keep getting worse after its partnership with transgender social media star Dylan Mulvaney. The latest weekly figures show a 21% drop in sales. Really? A prominent alcoholic beverage consultant, there are such things, says the figures show Bud Light's core customers are ditching the brand. And that's the way it is.
Wow.
The Mark Thompson Show, crowdfunded. That means we have to rely on you. You can help keep us going by contributing via PayPal or Patreon. All you have to do is go to themarkthompsonshow.com, themarkthompsonshow.com, where you'll find those links and so much more. I'm Kim McAllister on The Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Who's Mark Thompson? 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 Who's Mark Thompson?
Yeah, I am excited about our segment, Talk to a British Guy, which follows. You just saw a card, a graphic card, to remind you that there are still 3 spots available for the happy half hour, which is actually 45 minutes. The Mark Thompson Show happy half hour is this Thursday, May 4th, 7 to 7:30. But as I say, it'll probably be 7 to 7:45. Anyway, it's a private off-air Zoom meetup. There are only 15 spots available, only 3 left. To register, the Mark Thompson Show at gmail.com with your name, email, and phone number. And even if we sell those last 3, and they're $75 a piece, the money to support the show, we will waitlist you. And if somebody can't make it, you're in. So it's our special event. It is Thursday, and I hope you can be part of it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And now, without any further delay, yes. Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talk to a British Guy.
Yes, it is. And today, you can't get much more British guy than this guy. Put it together for Phil Fairclough, everybody. Come on. Yes, Phil. Welcome on this ramp up to coronation. I'm very, very excited. When did you become a British guy, Phil? It was you were born into it, weren't you?
Well, didn't have much choice in that, Mark.
Yeah. You're a television producer. You were, again, did you live in, I don't know the answer to this question. Did you live in London as a kid, or where did you live in
Yes, I grew up in Kew Gardens, West London, close to the Royal Botanical Gardens, which is probably why I have this abiding fascination for nature and plants, and why living here in South Florida, as I do now, is such a wonder, because the plants are all like Dr. Seuss plants. So, yes.
I do want to tell people, and then I want to ask you about the Royals and stuff, and we can talk about anything. It's really just an excuse to talk to a British guy. And I want the audience to know that Phil is a swashbuckling nature producer, journalist, presenter, meaning he goes to exotic locales all over the world. I met him in South Africa. And that guy you see wading through the swamp with a camera on his shoulder or whatever, to get the better shot of the gator or some kind of exotic reptile or some sort of rare primate, or even just to tell the story of marine life and how it all contributes to a delicate ecosystem. That's this guy, Phil Fairclough, who does that, produces those shows and has this rich history with nature. You have really always been the guy who's tried to involve yourself in telling stories about the planet.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I grew up in West London, which is not richly endowed with animal spectacle. You sort of count yourself lucky if you see one of your gray squirrels. Although I have to say, actually, whilst we're on the subject of West London, if you've been there recently, you may be surprised to hear the screeching. Imagine this, a gloomy, gray, cold, wet winter day in February. You're walking through the streets of West London, and suddenly overhead screeches. The screeching of a flock of parrots. Can you imagine? And you look up, and there are maybe 50, 100 sometimes vivid electric green parakeets flying around. And they have adopted London, and in particular the south of London, as their home. They're actually they're called ringneck parakeets. They originate in the Himalayas, so they're quite comfortable in bad weather. And as a Brit, we have plenty of that. And they apparently escaped from a film studio where some pirate movie was being made in Shepperton Film Studios. And they've made themselves quite at home. And I just wish that when I had been a kid, obsessed with nature as I was, because I was reading about the great British animal collector Gerald Durrell, and of course there was it was pre-David Attenborough. We didn't even have a TV, but when we got a TV, it was Jacques Cousteau. But yeah, I was inspired by all of that. And then I, charted my course to study zoology, which then took a bit of a detour when I became a journalist for the BBC.
Yeah, exactly. You brought that background to this career and this profession, and then that morphed into actually producing these nature shows and reporting. Go ahead, Kim, for Phil. You have to unmute, but there we go.
I just wanted to make a comment that I think only British people should be allowed to narrate nature specials. That should be it. There should be no one else. Sorry, Mark.
How dare you, first of all?
Only the British people on the nature specials. That's it. That's all I want to say.
When Sir David finally gives up his narration slot, then I'll be happy to audition.
Yeah, it is true.
You have a better baritone.
It is my world, narration, but I also know when somebody else is better for the piece, so I would happily yield. There is something about the British way of speaking that is intoxicating. You have to admit, Phil, Americans, we roll over for that accent.
Well, so I was told, actually, but it didn't. No one ever quite rolled over for me in that respect. But I do get the "I love your accent," and my response is "I love yours." But the British accent, it's become a bit more mundane now because every show seems to have the bad Brits, whether it's Simon Cowell, and we're usually cast in the role of villain. So it's a double-edged sword, and you do have the tendency to sound a bit haughty.
Yes, but you have to ride that line from haughtiness to sophistication. And that's
arrogant. Or elegant and arrogant.
Yeah. Where's our Simon?
It's about as bad as it can possibly get.
Yeah, there you go. That's our Simon. It's the desperation you have to.
I think there's a hint of desperation. I really do.
Yeah, there you go. That's our Simon.
Yes.
So now to the Royals. I mean, you've you're a refugee from Britain, having set things up here. How long have you been in this country?
So I arrived in America full-time, shall we say, in the end of 2002 to take up a position as a head of production for the Discovery Channel. And that lasted a while. And then as usually happens, a bit like being a football manager, you get fired and go back to doing the day job, which was actually making films. And but yes, I've been here since 2002. I never expected to still be here. But luckily I met the love of my life, who you know well, who's also in the animal chasing game.
And she's a brilliant primatologist. Yeah.
She is indeed. And luckily she selected me as her prime mate.
Oh, that was very strong. Yeah, I love that. Good. All right. So, Phil, tell us about then your take on the Royals. And I believe you have a couple of Royal stories.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's quite common. I think it's hard for most people who don't have a monarch at their beck and call, on the coins, on the stamps, named on many buildings, to sort of recognize that they're kind of in the air. They're everywhere. I was, like I mentioned, the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew, quite the most spectacular botanical gardens. But when I was, I think I was about 7 at school, the Queen came to her garden, her botanical garden. And so we went on a field trip, a day out to Kew Gardens. And the Queen was just being driven around. I don't think she was driving herself, but being driven around from memory, it was definitely an open topped, and it probably was a Rolls Royce. So the Queen is being driven around this spectacular garden in her Rolls Royce, and sort of a day out. And for me and my cohorts, we were just sort of let loose. And I remember clearly running like a little maniac alongside the Queen in her Rolls Royce. And can you imagine doing that today? I mean, even a 7-year-old could be a threat. So,
right.
They were happy times, and the monarchy was seemed to be quite accessible.
Yeah, you're right. There was an innocence to that, I suppose, that you might not find now.
I think that world has gone and has changed, sadly. And the British royals, though, are sort of beloved, even if you philosophically disagree with the monarchy, which you can do both. I mean, I have issues with the monarchy, but at the same time, I have enormous admiration for the Queen, dearly departed, and Charles. I'm quite fond of Charles. And
well, Charles is someone who has values reflected in his public remarks that would have to be very consistent with your own. I'm talking about environmental values.
He most certainly does. I mean, he was let's say an early adopter of environmental concerns, issues, and actions. I mean, he has, and I happen to know because I visited, but he has a garden which he sort of turned into at Highgrove, which he turned into a sort of model plant-based water treatment facility. And he has long espoused care for the environment, concern for the environment, which is one of the things that I think, his public persona has, and the many challenges of his life has obscured, is he really has picked up early concerns about our planet. And I like him. I remember, so I've had a number of encounters, including a trip to Buckingham Palace with my father, who became he got one of the Queen's honors. He was a diplomat, and he got what's called a CMG, which is a Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, but is colloquially known as a Call Me God.
For CMG, that's marvelous.
Yes.
So what was that? How old were you when you went to Buckingham Palace with him?
Oh, I was probably, I remember wearing a suit. So I was about 25 or 26.
Oh, okay. So you could really take it in. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was spectacular. And obviously this happens twice a year, the Queen's, or now the King's honors. There's the birthday honors and then the New Year honors. And you get to select, I think, well, you get to go with your family and see your loved one. In this case, my dad, have the Queen hand him a Call Me God. He was a little bit miffed, actually. Not miffed. He was very pleased, but because he'd been in the British civil service, but then he did quite an un-British thing, and he went to work for the European Commission. So instead of getting the automatic knighthood that goes with that role, which would have been a KCMG, he only got a CMG.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, no, there is definite ranks and of Queen's honors.
The hierarchy and the various honors and the hierarchy associated with those various honors is part of that whole royal thing. I mean, it just seems so extraordinary to me. My other half loved Downton Abbey and watched every episode of Downton Abbey, watched the movie, watched it again, I think there was another movie. But anyway, Your Excellency, Your Worship, Your Highness, Your Milady, all of these things are actually specific. To me, it all seems interchangeable. She said, no. They all are specifically related to a person's position within that hierarchy. It seems extraordinary. I guess I'm getting to, as a British subject, do you find yourself... do you internalize that so you just know it? Do they teach it in school? How do you know that?
I don't know that you would know when to call someone Her Ladyship versus Lady, or, is a Viscountess. How do you address correctly a viscountess versus a duchess. I mean, that's not
Right.
cool. And you know, truthfully, if you were raised in that, let's say you were a, I was trying to describe to someone the debutante role. I don't know if you're even familiar, but young ladies would be given a tour as a debutante, and they would be rolled out before eligible suitors of a particular class, and you would then have to know how to address someone. But I'll give you an example. So this was the royal story that I have never told, but it's pretty fascinating. So I had been around royals, obviously, since my childhood. As a journalist for the BBC, I covered many royal visits. But, you know, you're always sort of behind a barrier. You're in the press mob. But on one occasion, my patch as a BBC news reporter was Cornwall, in the southwest of England, the far southwest of England. You may have heard the Duke of Cornwall mentioned. Well, at that time, the Duke of Cornwall was Prince Charles. And I was, so this was my patch. And as part of the Duchy of Cornwall, which is the lands owned by the Duke of Cornwall, he had an island in the Isles of Scilly, which are about 30 miles off the southwest of England. Beautiful, beautiful islands. And the one that he sort of claimed as his own was called Tresco. And Tresco was a private island that was leased by a family called the Dorian Smiths. And Robert Dorian Smith, who was the sort of laird, shall we say, to mix my countries, but he was like the laird of Tresco, and he was a youngish guy, and he and I enjoyed windsurfing together. So I was sort of friendly with him, and he had done a charity windsurf from Tresco, 35 miles to the mainland, and I covered it, and we became mates. And anyway, on this occasion, it was the sort of spring bank holiday, and I had decided to go for a little vacation with my then girlfriend to Tresco for a few days. And I knew it was a bit weird when I got a phone call from Robert saying, "Phil, you're not bringing a crew with you, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm just coming for a vacation, 3 days or so." Anyway, didn't think much more about it. But I arrived from one of the other islands on a boat, which my friend had. And we landed on the beach because it's a very informal sort of place. And out of the bushes comes a burly looking guy in shorts. And he said, "You Phil Fairclough?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Oh, we're expecting you." And I suddenly realized, this is not the normal way to be greeted. And I said, "What's going on here?" And it was revealed that Prince Charles and then Diana and the boys were staying on the island. This was their spring vacation.
That is great.
Wow.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that I had brought with me, because I was always I mentioned my interest in windsurfing, I had brought with me some very large kites, each one about 10 foot long. And I had 3 of them, extremely powerful, very entertaining to fly. And I decided that the place to fly them was, because there were no cars on this island, so the only way you could arrive was by boat or by helicopter. But, you know, when the helicopters weren't coming and going, the helipad, which was a field, was available for flying kites. So I took my kites down to the field, the helipad, launched them, and over the horizon, whilst I had these big kites on strings like this being pulled around, suddenly a golf cart appears, and I look up and I see it's my friend Robert, and there's someone with him, and he pulls over, and I don't pay too much attention. I think, you know, I'm trying to fly these kites, and he says, "Phil, you've got your new toys. Mom, may I introduce Phil Fairclough from the BBC?" And I look up, and lo and behold, it's Diana.
Wow.
And then another golf cart comes over with 2 boys in it. It's William and Harry. And what do young boys want to do when they see like this new toy?
They want to play with the kite too.
They want to fly the kites. And these are kites that, I mean, I must weigh 165 pounds. They would pull me off my feet in no time. I mean, just, you know, a gust of wind and you're
sure.
You've seen people sailing kite boards, and they're very, very powerful. So I think this is tricky. I mean,
yeah, you don't want to say no, but if you give them these, right, you can't say no, but if you give them these things, they will absolutely. It's a tragedy waiting to happen.
They would. Here am I thinking, what's going to happen if I injure or worse the future King of England? So anyway, I compromised this by I let them play with the kites, but with my other half at the time holding onto the strings, and inevitably they crashed, and then I would have to scurry around and put them back together and launch them again. But they got their game time, and then Diana said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I hope they're not being a nuisance." And I'm thinking, you have no idea. But what was really, really entertaining, and this was the other thing that was, I was a journalist. I was a non-working journalist, and I was the only journalist on the island. But all of the assorted Fleet Street press had hired boats. They were desperate to get onto the island, and they all knew I was there because, journalists, and they're all texting me, "Phil, what's going on?" It was pre-text, and I'm thinking, I have a great story here to sell, but I am not going to sell it. This is just an amazing encounter. And anyway, at one point, so my girlfriend's nickname for me at that time was Frog. And she's going, "Frog, do this, Frog, do that." And suddenly I hear this little voice pipe up, "Frog, Frog." And it's William. Now imagine he's 8 or 9 or 10, whatever he was. And I said, "Come here, oi, come here. Only certain people in this world are allowed to call me Frog, and you're not one of them."
Wow.
At which point he reached into his pocket and says, "I'm terribly sorry. Would you like a Fox's Glacier Mint?" And handed me a sort of a candy to placate me. Which I haven't ever told this story except to some close friends. So you're the first media outlet to hear.
I love it. It's a great story. I love it for the accidental nature of the encounter.
Completely random, which is why I thought there's no gain here. This is just something that'll be fun to recount at some point.
I love it. I love it. Phil, come visit again. Tell us about one of your projects when we have time to discuss one of those various, I think, magnificent, exciting, dynamic projects that you bring to life about the planet, about various fragile ecosystems, about exotic locales, all of that stuff you do. I just love it. So thank you for indulging us with some royal stuff today, and come again, will you please?
I would love to. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Fairclough. Phil Fairclough. Yeah. See you, Phil. Good stuff. Wow. Talk to a British guy, really.
The Mark Thompson Show.
I will ding placate, and I will also ding espouse.
I think his whole, everything he said was dingable. He just...
well, I'll tell you what he did in conversation, which you do see oftentimes in writing. But only a Brit could carry it off in conversation. And that is, he used this word, whilst. We say, while this is going on.
Right.
And he said, whilst this was happening. That you can't pull off as an American without sounding like a jerk.
Pretentious a-hole, right.
but when you're a Brit, you can get away. So I should ding whilst as well. Yeah. So he's really great, and he's working on some really exciting projects, and I really do want him back for some of those. Kim, we have a fork in the road.
I think we pushed through. I don't have any breaking news. We've covered the biggest things. The writer's strike is underway. We talked a little bit about banking and migrants, and so I think we forge ahead with our award-winning journalist.
I agree. He's remarkable, and I want to get to him. So thank you, Kim.
The Mark Thompson Show.
How about it for the Pulitzer Prize winner, the multiple best-selling author, co-founder of DCReport.org. He is David Cay Johnston. Hi, David.
Hello.
Thank you for making time for us always. I was watching something this morning from Washington. It was the feed from Sheldon Whitehouse, and his open reminded me a bit of you, the way you just lay out the facts about various things. In this case, it's the Supreme Court, because these hearings are involving the Supreme Court and the clear ethical breaches that we're seeing. Of course, it's tough to have an ethical breach when you have no articulated ethics. But as he was stacking one fact on top of another, as I say, it reminds me of some of your reporting. But it also, I'll tell you frankly, I thought, well, I should play this for David Cay Johnston rather than have you remark on it after playing it. I just would like to kick it around with you a little bit, because it has become a front and center issue in a way that it hadn't prior to the last month or so. The ProPublica case, where they revealed these Clarence Thomas trips that were being footed by this billionaire donor, that started it, and now we just see the floodgates open. And I think these are justices that are completely compromised.
Well, I think there's a lot more that could come out about justices based on how much has come out about the Chief Justice, Justice Thomas, and Justice Gorsuch in roughly, 10 days now? That suggests that there's stuff just lying there waiting for reporters to do the work to develop and prove it. And we've got several issues going on with Justice Thomas. But I don't think anything will happen from all of this because, first of all, federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, are appointed for life. If Congress passes a law that says, and I don't think the Republicans in the House would go along with this, but they might, if Congress were to pass a law saying you have to comply with all the ethical standards of every other judge in the United States, that would end up becoming eventually a case before the Supreme Court. Somebody would bring such a case, and then the Supreme Court's going to rule on that. We got a real fundamental problem here, and the Supreme Court is not only the most unaccountable area of our federal government by design of the framers of our Constitution, but there's essentially nothing we can do because the only way to remove a justice is through impeachment. That requires a majority of votes in the House, possible if it's an egregious attitude, and especially if it were one of the liberal justices, one of the three liberal justices. But then you have to have 67 votes in the Senate, which is divided 51-49 politically. And if there's anything we've learned from the impeachments of Bill Clinton and the two impeachments of Donald Trump, it's that this is, in fact, by design, political, not criminal, not civil, and party lines matter. So I think that nothing will change here, despite a behavior that would cause a judge on any other court to be removed if they didn't remove themselves. And there's one other wrinkle in this, Mark, that's important to keep in mind. The standard is the appearance of impropriety. It is not actual impropriety. And the reason for that is to actually protect judges. So something that to an outsider might look to be improper, that in fact is perfectly proper. But if people would perceive it that way, then the judge can step back without saying I did something improper. The judge can say, because this appears to people to be improper, I'm recusing myself, that is, removing myself from the case, and another judge can take on this matter. And the Supreme Court just basically says, we're above that. We've been appointed for life. Go away.
Indeed. And I hear this from Ruth. Justice Scalia was on a boondoggle when he died on that ranch in Texas some years ago. That's true. And it's interesting how these things are hatched, David. You know, they're hatched in ways in which you have wealthy donors. A call is made to one of these hunting ranches, like the one that Scalia died on. And you never have the judge himself actually involved in the conversation. And then the offer is made from whatever, in a very kind of personal way, to join us on this hunting expedition. Meanwhile, you can classify it as a hospitality thing, as I guess that's Clarence Thomas's high ground, when the reality is it's an institutionalized way of corrupting pay to play or payoffs. I mean, these things are arranged, in other words, from those who have business before the court.
Well, the question to ask about the Harlan Crow relationship with Clarence Thomas, where apparently Harlan Crow has spent over 20 years or so millions of dollars flying the justice and his wife in his private jets, taking them to his yachts and other exotic locations on vacation. Would Harlan Crow be doing this if Clarence Thomas was a traffic court judge? And all of these cases that we know about arise after these people are appointed to office. Neil Gorsuch, a Trump appointee to the Supreme Court, was involved in a land transaction with the head of one of the biggest law firms in America, which regularly has cases before the court, an abundance of cases before the court. And when he filled out his disclosure form, which I suppose the Chief Justice could argue they don't even have to do that, he left off the name of the buyer. Now, why would you do that? Well, the only reason you would do that is you don't want someone to notice. And of course, it's public record. Somebody could go look it up. Thank goodness we have public records so we can look up things like that. But the fact is that he left it off. That is what in the law is known as mens rea. It's an indication of criminal intent, or in this case, perhaps unethical intent. There's no reason to leave that off your disclosure form. And people like Harlan Crow, they don't need to have a personal case before the court. They're trying to shape the law to enhance the power of corporations, reduce accountability for wealthy people who control corporations, and to restrict access to the courts by ordinary people. This has been a long-term goal of the Federalist Society and others who view the world the way the Federalist Society does. And Harlan Crow has interest before the court. One of the cases where he had an interest was documents from his company showing that the COVID rent relief restrictions were harming their profit margins. Now, you can make the argument that, well, this applied to every landlord in the country and it was a terrible policy for landlords. And in fact, I've said that if you want to give rent relief in a pandemic to renters, you have to give rent relief to the landlords too, because they've got mortgages to pay and bills to pay and repairs to make.
Sure.
But nonetheless, Harlan Crow was in a position to privately argue for what he thought was best during these meetings with Chief Justice Thomas. And so there's a real fundamental problem here. But Mark, I don't see any way to do anything about it so long as Congress is narrowly divided.
It does seem as though we've evolved or devolved to this place where, and one of the comments was, the normal system that we sort of talk about, and you've mentioned it before, and the system as it was set up by the framers of checks and balances, it doesn't necessarily really apply anymore. You have really an unchecked, unbalanced amount of power concentrated with these activist Supreme Court judges who are now, look, I view them as the greatest threat really was philosophical, that they were completely compromised philosophically. There was no objectivity. There was no real evaluation. There was no recusal on the part of Thomas in a case that involves his own wife. I mean, it seems there's corruption there. But now you see that they're bought and paid for in other ways as well. What about the checks and balances, I guess, is what I'm getting at. I mean, have we lost our way?
Well, the framers of our Constitution, who are not the founders of the country, only 22% of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence were involved in writing our Constitution. The founders were concerned about institutional corruption. They understood there'll always be individual venality. There will be government officials who will do things they shouldn't do. Their concern was institutional corruption. And Zephyr Teachout, interesting name, Zephyr Teachout, who's a professor at Fordham Law, wrote a terrific book about this, maybe 8 years ago. And a large part of it was about the controversy over when the French king gave our ambassador, Benjamin Franklin, a jeweled snuff box. And the idea wasn't that Benjamin Franklin is corrupt. It was, well, he can't accept that gift. That gift belongs to the people of the United States of America. And the whole focus was on institutional corruption, not on was Ben Franklin corrupt. Well, under this Supreme Court, we have the McDonald decision out of Virginia, where the governor of Virginia and his wife the wife was taken on expensive shopping trips to Manhattan. The governor and his wife drove around in a $500,000 sports car that belonged to the businessman who paid for these trips to Manhattan. They were given expensive jewelry and watches and just all sorts of things lavished on them. And the governor at the same time was speaking on behalf of this company, which was trying to get subsidies approved by the legislature and others, and acted very much in their interests. And he was convicted along with his wife. And it was a terrible trial where the governor threw his wife under the bus and basically said, I wouldn't be here today if my wife, had any kind of moral character. Wow. And you can tell what a loving marriage that was. and the Supreme Court, essentially, in throwing out the conviction, legalized bribery, because what they said was you had to have a direct quid pro quo. I'm giving you this watch or this shopping trip in return for you doing the following discrete act. I think most eighth graders have enough sophistication to understand that that's not how it goes. But by doing that, the Supreme Court has addressed this, what's known as theft of services issue as well, where you're supposed to be working for the taxpayers and only for the taxpayers, and you're doing things for other people. Well, you've got to show an exact link, quid pro quo, not a general policy, not general corruption of the institution. And that should disturb us a great deal. And it is part of this fundamental pattern that we have seen going on in the court back to when Ronald Reagan appointed Rehnquist as Chief Justice. And one of Rehnquist's one of his mentees was John Glover Roberts, now the Chief Justice of the United States.
Oddly, though, yeah, go ahead.
And all the way along, the court movement has been to loosen up on corruption in government, allow more excuses for it, loosen up on misconduct regarding shareholder money and behavior by accountants and executives, and to tighten up on access to the courts and on hearing appeals from people who have newly discovered evidence that they're actually innocent of the crime they committed. Not technical issue of a jury instruction, but oh my goodness, here's a videotape we didn't have that suddenly has appeared showing the killer, and it's not a 5'3" white guy, it's a 6'4" white guy. So it can't be that person. And the courts have been very hostile to that. So this should really disturb us. The Supreme Court has always been behind the curve from the beginning of the Republic, and probably will always be behind the curve. But the turn it's taking of increasing corporate power and diminishing individual power, and siding with the notion that it's okay to execute innocent people if they were found guilty by a jury, because we must respect the finality of jury decisions. All of this should be deeply disturbing to us, but nothing's going to happen as long as we have a closely divided Congress.
Yeah. So you're saying, look, the checks and balances are dependent on a Congress that isn't so deeply divided, where the votes are sort of preordained. I mean,
yes, and preordained would be exactly the right word, Mark. And it also is dependent on the level of individual integrity of people who get a lifetime appointment. I mean, the idea of the lifetime appointment was that it would separate you from the slings and arrows of political debate and controversy. Okay, there's a good argument to be made for that. But what if the person you appointed lied to get to the court, as it's pretty clear that both Rehnquist and John Glover Roberts and Clarence Thomas did, and Brett Kavanaugh did? I think it's quite clear at this point that all of them lied in their confirmation hearings.
And when you say lie, you're speaking about what lies specifically, David?
Well, Rehnquist denied during his confirmation hearings, this was 40 years ago, so my memory may be a little off, but he denied engaging in certain kinds of acts that were Reagan administration efforts to suppress votes by Black people in the South. Roberts similarly denied that he'd been involved in certain deals, not economic or political deals, but legal matters that he was questioned about. Clarence Thomas insisted that he had never sexually harassed Anita Hill, but the Senate Judiciary Committee, then headed by Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy, didn't listen to any of the other women who were ready to come forward to testify in support of that kind of behavior. And of course, in Brett Kavanaugh's case, only the Stanford professor, Professor Ford, testified, whereas there were apparently many other women willing to come forward to say that I was either literally raped or sexually assaulted or molested or otherwise mistreated by the beer-loving Brett Kavanaugh. And that was all shut down. And there's been some stories now that have come out about how the Trump White House or someone acting at its direction saw to it that the roughly 4,000 reports of misconduct that came into the FBI, many of which I'm sure were bogus, just that number should tell you that, but they were suppressed and they were not turned over to the Senate.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've got at least 3 sitting justices about whom we can have it's reasonable to ask serious questions about their integrity and their moral character.
Yeah, it's already been suggested Barrett also lied. It depends what lies you're talking about. As I say, philosophically, there's clearly lying going on. And then you have this once in a while. Chris writes, this is like being mad at the game because you messed up playing it. I don't think that's fair. I mean, it's like saying, well, I'm sorry, I'll let you. You're the guest, but I don't think that's a fair bust necessarily.
Well, yeah, we should be angry at Biden and the late Senator Kennedy for approving Clarence Thomas, who, as I've said on your show before, would have made a fine traffic court judge.
Right.
But, you know, just because we made a mistake doesn't mean we should have to live with it forever. I mean, slavery was a mistake. You suggesting we should have it today? No, that's ridiculous. We used to deny women the right to vote. We had child labor. Should we not, you know, you fix things when you learn about them, but what the framers of the Constitution, I don't think, and I've read a lot of their writings teach about what they did. I don't think it occurred to them that someone who is a lifetime appointment as a Supreme Court justice or any federal judge would behave dishonestly. We have in fact impeached and removed some federal judges. There was a federal judge in that resort island off Texas, Galveston, who called himself the Emperor of Galveston and hired onto his clerical staff women who were involved in messy divorces or child custody fights and needed their jobs. And it was a requirement for them to keep their jobs that they serviced him sexually in his chamber on demand. And he resigned only so that he wouldn't be convicted by the Senate and his wife would not get his pension because he's in prison for the rest of his life. He was able to collect his pension just by resigning from the bench. Donald Trump's sister was able to stop the inquiry into her corrupt tax behavior, where clearly if she were brought up on charges she committed, as Donald and his other siblings have, serious, calculated, repeated tax crimes. And by simply resigning from the bench, she stopped the inquiry into her behavior. Judges have set themselves up in a privileged position of not being accountable. That violates the principle we were all taught in junior high school, if we were awake in class anyway, of checks and balances.
And the privileged of the privileged are the Supreme Court justices. You mentioned Trump. I want to ask you about this latest thing in covering Trump. You know, you do it the way I am used to seeing journalists cover subjects and politicians. You do it with a view toward investigation, with a view toward objectivity and telling a story. Cable television and journalism that you find there is somewhere in that squishy middle, unless it's true opinion, and it seems as though we're going that way. That lengthy preamble is to simply ask you about the concession, it would seem, that CNN has made to hosting Trump as their first town hall.
Right.
And they're going to have a town hall with Trump. He'll be interviewed not by a Jake Tapper, who I think is fairly tough when it comes to Q&A, but by Caitlin Collins, who potentially, by the way, to be fair to her, could also be a tough. But she has a lot of pressure on her. And it's interesting. And again, you've got a guy, and it was said by someone, do you start with, you led an insurrection against the government of the U.S., and why should any American voter support a candidate who sought to undermine the Constitution, institutions, and values he was sworn to uphold? I mean, do you add that into the mix somewhere?
Well, you certainly wouldn't start with it, because Donald will just tear off his microphone and walk away.
Right.
But understand, there's a broader context about CNN that I am not seeing in the news reports about CNN. And we have a lot of good media reporters. When David Shaw at the LA Times was assigned in the late 70s to cover the news media as a story, he was the only person in the country doing that. Now we have lots of people doing it. And in the case of the CNN town hall, CNN is now owned by AT&T, the old Ma Bell. Guess which of the big companies in America support Donald Trump, have funded Trump, and after the J6 insurrection, when lots of companies said, we're not giving to the Republicans who voted not to seat Joe Biden, we're not going to give to Trump, AT&T has been with him all the way along. So to think that the decision to hold the town hall is just a purely journalistic decision, I think, is naive. On the cable shows, and of course, I'm often a guest on CNN and MSNBC. I used to be on Fox until I corrected one of their hosts too many times on the facts. You'll see on both CNN and MSNBC a lot of experts who accurately describe the state of the law. You'll occasionally see people who do a terrible job of it and who get the law wrong, or who talk about areas of the law they don't know. If you're a federal prosecutor, that doesn't mean you know New York State criminal procedure, for example. And I'm often shocked at the basics about our Constitution that are misstated by not the real regular guests, the paid ones. I'm never paid by TV or by you. But those people, they appear and they disappear. On the other hand, on Fox, I see every day, and I watch Fox every day, at least parts of it, experts, quote unquote experts, who have no idea what they're talking about. They don't understand the law. They don't understand the issue before the court. It doesn't mean you can't make a mistake. I mean, I said something once on Ari Melber that was just really dumb because my research assistant handed me the wrong piece of paper and I assumed it was the right one. And I went with what was on the piece of paper. And as soon as I got off the air, I thought, that doesn't sound right. And I went and checked and, I was wrong. We can all make mistakes, but on Fox, it's not a function of making mistakes. Fox is in a very clear business. Their business is telling their audience the lies they want to hear. And whatever the lie they want to hear is, Fox will serve it up, and they will denigrate people who have actual serious information. And it's very bad for the country. We need to have strong, conservative, thoughtful voices. We need to have a marketplace of ideas, not what we've gotten, and that is my way or the highway.
Right.
And
That's
you can
clearly
find that
the
on both
country we're
sides
in
of the
now.
spectrum, but I think it's much more heavily weighted on the right than on the left.
So do you see this CNN move to have him in, David, as a Foxian kind of thing? That is to say,
Oh yeah.
so you're seeing
Chris Licht. I've never met him, but I've been reading up on him. Chris Licht, who is now the head of CNN, who was an AT&T executive, he is trying to get Fox to capture a large part of the audience on the right. There is an opportunity right now to do that because
to get CNN to do that. You're saying
for
he's going to have
CNN to capture
Yeah.
some of the Fox audience because of the Tucker Carlson matter. The problem is, I don't believe you can capture that audience, especially the 1.5 million people who stopped watching Fox when Tucker was fired, because they're not interested, it appears, in the truth. They are interested in being reassured that that which they wish was true is true, which is, of course, the position of a small child, not an adult.
It's interesting to see them try to pivot. I also think this has to do with branding, the branding associated with CNN. Right-wing voters don't associate them with, as you suggest, the church that preaches what they want to hear. Yeah, so they've got some work to do.
And I don't mean to be rude, but it's 2:30 and I got to run, pal.
Oh, my God. David Cay Johnston, thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
All right. See you, David.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Yeah. I do let the time go, Kim. It's a failing. It's a failing of mine. One of my few failings. But I do have it. I lose track of the time.
It's easy to do that with him because he's so interesting. And
do you know who I am?
Yeah.
No matter what you ask him, he's always got a great answer. So
he had a ding word in there. I didn't want to interrupt him. It was I'll think of it. And Tom's not here today, so I don't know what the. We will take a break for Kim's news, and then on the other side, a Republican, a real, honest to goodness Florida Republican, Francis Rooney. He's the former congressman from Florida, now a former ambassador, and I have a feeling we're not going to agree on a couple of things.
I hope he doesn't know about Florida Fabulous Friday. Does he know about that?
I wouldn't mention it. Yeah. Smash the like button like a boss.
With your iron rod.
Cost you nothing. Give us the thumbs up.
Smash it with your iron rod.
Damn straight. Kim's news next, and then the ambassador, Mark Thompson Show.
The Mark Thompson Show.
On the Mark Thompson Show, I'm Kim McAllister. Let's start with the banking crisis. Why don't we? Because this is something that just keeps on coming. Dozens of regional bank stocks are now taking a hit in volatile trading on the stock market. Shares in California-based PacWest and Western Alliance, headquartered in Phoenix, took the biggest hits, and trading for both had to be halted. Federal regulators, of course, seized First Republic Bank yesterday and sold all deposits and most of its assets to J.P. Morgan Chase. The number of job openings are at a nearly 2-year low. The new numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics released today show there were a total of almost 9.6 million job openings in March. It is the lowest number since May of 2021. The U.S. Surgeon General is calling loneliness a public health crisis. Is that not the perfect picture?
No, that's sad.
Dr. Vivek Murthy releasing an advisory calling attention to isolation and the lack of connection that he is seeing in America. He says even before the pandemic, about half of all adults said they were experiencing loneliness every single day. Well, let me tell you this. You are never lonely on the Mark Thompson Show. So if you feel that way, then I'm glad you're here with us because we're all in it together. And nobody has to feel bad or lonely.
It's fantastic.
That's very sweet. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that the truth, though? Yeah.
It is the truth. It's all there, black and white.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal.
Yeah. We're your friend.
That's right. No loneliness here. The first reparations estimate is out regarding how much to pay Black people across California. Economists say they should be compensated $1.2 million for damages caused by the state's history of racism tied to slavery. Not the final say on the total amount of reparations needed. A task force is planning to vote Saturday on whether to accept the draft report and will then finalize recommendations to the state legislature. There's gonna be more pink slips flying on Wall Street. Morgan Stanley reportedly plans to cut about 3,000 jobs by the end of June. That, according to Bloomberg, most of the layoffs will affect the banking and trading staff. At least one congressman is voicing support for Hollywood writers, the strike. In a tweet, Democratic Representative Adam Schiff of California says Writers Guild of America's fight for better pay is vital to ensuring the livelihood of those who make the entertainment industry such a creative powerhouse. More than 11,000 writers walked off the job overnight as contract talks broke down over pay increases and residual fees as well.
Now, if you want just a summary of kind of what they're striking over, our first 10 minutes, we discussed it with comedian Fritz Coleman, comedy writer Fritz Coleman as well. So we kind of touched on that. But yeah, it's a big deal. It could run a long time because they are nowhere near any kind of agreement.
I understand the clock is also ticking, speaking of jobs and possible strikes, for teachers in Oakland. They plan to go on strike if no deal is reached with the district by Thursday. They've been working without a contract since October. They want a 23% pay raise. The district says it's optimistic an agreement will be made in time to prevent a walkout. And the staff at a Petaluma bookstore will unionize. Workers at Copperfield's Books, Petaluma location, voting 13-2 to create a union. More than 171,000 people in California are now homeless. Let me say that number again. 171,000 just in California, homeless.
I mean, that's more than a problem with housing. I'm sorry, it is. I don't think affordable housing is the whole issue, but this is for another time, though.
Well, and you make a good point, because the rest of the story goes like this. Of those 171,000 in California, 11% of them are fast food workers, with half in Los Angeles County. A report by Economic Roundtable cites low pay and part-time hours. The nonprofit looked at data from restaurant chains including McDonald's, Starbucks, Burger King, KFC, and Taco Bell. It says raising wages is the single most important step for reducing economic homelessness in the state. So these 11% of them are people with fast food jobs. They are working, but because of low wages and because they're being kept at part-time in those positions, can't afford to have a real home.
This is the new game. Not so new, really saw it over the last few years, where they keep you part-time, work you to the very limit of part-time. They don't have to pay benefits, and that ends up being an insanely big economic burden that you have to bear as a worker. It's almost devious. It is devious, I think, you know. By the way, it happens at big companies like, broadcast institutions, places where people are going to work right now. It happens there. So it's not as though it's just fast food workers. It's happening across the spectrum of jobs in America.
More families are saying, sayonara sucker to California. 39 million people called California home at the beginning of the year, slightly down from last January. But a new report shows it's an improvement from 2021, when the population dropped by more than 200,000. 4 counties hit the hardest: Lassen, Del Norte, Plumas, and Los Angeles. On the flip side, the town of Paradise saw a 24% boom as it recovers from the deadliest wildfire in the state.
Isn't that wild? Paradise making a comeback. Good for them.
Well, things, they're rebuilding. So the more they rebuild, the more homes are finished, the more people are moving back in.
Sure.
And the last story I wanted to get to, do we have time for a wacky one?
We do. I don't think the ambassador has made it here yet. I'll have to check this. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's good for me, because what I wanted to show you was think back to your senior prom. Did you take a limo? Was that not good enough for you? No.
if you're really asking, you want me to answer honestly this question?
Yeah.
I don't want to derail us, but I will. There was no prom at my school.
What?
That's what I mean. I knew it would derail us, so I didn't mean to.
No prom? What kind of crazy high school did you go to?
They were a kind of progressive high school, and they felt. I think it was one of those things that, that I really don't. I wasn't in on it, and I'll be honest with you. Like when you're not in the prom world,
right?
And I wasn't because there was no prom at my school.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't care whether there's a prom or not. To be perfectly honest, I was glad that there was no pressure to get a date and all that stuff, so because I was kind of shy.
Expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we had a party, like a big dance, I think, but it wasn't a prom,
Right.
And it wasn't announced as a prom, and it didn't feel like a prom, and it was, so.
Yeah.
So my story is kind of an outlier story, but anyway, go ahead and tell me
a lot
about
of kids they'll
It's a
go in
big
a group,
thing, man.
they take a limo to prom or whatever. But not this kid. No, let me play a little bit of this for you.
Okay.
Oops, I'm trying to click on the thing.
Instead of a limo, he took
Instead
this
of a limo.
All right.
Or arriving in a limo. But how about arriving in a tank?
What?
This is how Washington State resident Sherman Bynum made his entrance at the Camas High School prom in the turrets of a World War II tank.
Sherman, are you happy?
Heck yeah. We're kind of tired of seeing sports cars, limousines, the average ride. But also as a teenage boy, I like tanks.
It was offloaded near the prom venue, the treads rubberized to avoid damaging roads. A bagpiper known as the Unipiper served as an escort. Sherman, no relation to the tank, used a GoFundMe page to raise the $1,000 needed to rent the tank from a collector.
People donated to that.
I'll give the kid credit.
As for Sherman's date,
He asked me with a sign that said, "I'd be thankful to take you to prom with me."
That's cute.
Yeah. I think that's enough of that. So yeah, the kid takes a tank to the prom. I guess that's, I was gonna, you were talking about the United States of guns, and it's just this whole, war machines are cool type of thing.
Yeah.
That's how it feels to me. It's I think it's inappropriate.
I think it's a fetishization of the military that I'm over. I really am over it. I am super grateful for those who have served in the military, and where I stand on honoring their service. But in a way, I think this fetishization and the civilian flood of camo and war type weapons and making it all accessible, it's a disservice in a way too with it. But more to the point, it's just, I think it's tone deaf.
Yeah.
But I have to also say that it is wild that this kid pulled that together. He got this GoFundMe.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Again, I don't mean to be, too much of a downer on that, but I agree with you. I think it's a little bit much. So,
well, I mean, isn't there a correlation? And maybe I'm making too big of a deal out of it or overthinking it too much, because it is, I think the way they presented it a fun story, but when you have stories of kids bringing guns to school, a tank is a weapon where you shoot people. Probably
that's
a World War II tank is
lost
defunct,
in here,
right? But that's what's really lost in it, is that this is a weapon that was meant to, protect our troops and or hurt other people. So why is it being used as a funny, let's go to prom? I don't know.
Yeah.
I know. I'm a Debbie Downer again. Bring it on.
No, it's we can differ. Again, I give him credit for being inventive and for that cute. He seems like a guy who's kind of got his head on straight. That said, in terms of the general trend toward, as I say, this romanticization, making everything sexy, making war sexy. War is awful, and that's why I honor those who have served, because I think it's such a terrifically awful thing, and so to be part of. They can call you up. You can end up in a lot of places that, you never bargained for. So if you talk to people who actually served in war theaters, it's a pretty brutal thing. So.
I'm sure the men that were in that tank during World War II never thought someday some kid who was tired of sports cars and limos was going to GoFundMe it to take it to senior prom.
That is a comment of the day. Very, very well said. Yeah.
The Mark Thompson Show, of course, is crowdfunded. That means we rely on you. You can find the Patreon and the PayPal links on themarkthompsonshow.com. That is our website where you will find those links and so much more. I'm Kim McAllister. That's right, the Mark Thompson Show.
They had to close down an entire radio station to silence him. And now, he's here. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Thompson. The Mark Thompson Show.
Who's Mark Thompson?
Joe Box and Little Anthony.
Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy.
There's a reason that this place is fun.
I'm not gonna cry! I'm not gonna cry!
Y'all can all go to hell, and I'm going back to Texas.
My bad. I'm sorry.
And I wanted to apologize to the Asian community, the Asian American community.
We've never seen anything like it before.
Have you ever seen anything like this? There is nothing in our history that quite compares to this.
Nobody has ever put something like this together that I've ever seen.
There's never been anything like this.
Why are you yelling?
Good day, sir.
Seriously, what the?
Yeah, great to have you here. That was our happy hour event announcement, I guess. The happy half hour is what we're calling it.
But it's really 45 minutes, yeah.
It's really 45 minutes, but happy half hour was sort of alliterative, I guess. So it's
a major announcement from the Mark Thompson Show.
It is a major announcement.
A major announcement.
So there are 3 spots available. I'll check the latest tote board. There are 3 spots available.
Okay.
For the happy half hour.
This is going to be fun. I mean, I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah.
And I'll tell you that if there are, we'll do a waiting list. If there are more people who want the spots, then we have spots available. We're only doing 15 because, as Kim says, we want it to be fun. We want everybody to be able to make a contribution. Like I'm talking about a conversation.
Yeah,
we want to be able to hang out. And if you have too many people, you can't do that. I want everybody to feel like, hey, this was worth it. It was fun. We'll be able to do a lot of things with music, with media that we can't do on this show because of copyright restrictions. So the fact that it's off the air is massive. It's going to be a very fun, I think, experience to have all of these elements in the mix that we can't normally have here. So again, only 15 spots available, 3 still available. Go to, and again, it's just your name, your email address, which you'll have on there, and your phone number. And you'll send to themarkthompsonshow@gmail.com. themarkthompsonshow@gmail.com.
Someone asked earlier, will there be dancing?
There probably will be a little dancing.
I think so.
I think the festive nature of things will spill over. So we are crowdfunded, so this is a way that we can bring in some additional funding to meet some of the challenges that we're facing right now. And Cheryl, come on, Cheryl.
Big shout out.
For 1999 super sticker. Appreciate that. Really, really cool, Cheryl. Yeah, when you give us a super sticker, when you're watching and replay, you hit the heart with the $. Again, that's just money that comes into the show, and it really does help us. I find this is the weirdest part of what we do in this world and on this platform. We end up having to remind you that we're crowd supported, and I say that's weird because I'm not used to it as a broadcaster. I mean, I'm used to ad supported stuff. But again, our show, homegrown, and really your part of growing it. So thank you for that. Look at that. I just saw it. What was it about? A great
Self-care. Yeah, and it's because I like this from Sayo Jones, because a lot of people say starting their morning off with you is good for their soul, their heart, their outlook for the day. It's funny, and they have some joy, and then they go on
Who
about
is
their
having
day.
that conversation?
But it is self-care, and if you have, to start with humor, and if you have a bit of that in your evening as well, I think that is self-care.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I am really
Treat yourself to something that gives you joy.
I do think it'll be fun. I think you'll be happy. I don't think anyone will be anything but really satisfied. I'm looking forward to it. And so I hope you'll join us. And if it works out, maybe we'll do others. But right now, it's a one-off. It's a single experience. I'd like to attend just to see Courtney speaking live and not just a disembodied voice. Yes, Courtney will be part of it. You'll see her on camera. Will drinks be included? Sharon is asking. Yes, drinks are very... Look, if I'm involved, I wish that I could lay off the sauce for a... no, I make it sound like I don't really... but I do enjoy an adult beverage once in a while. Not a problem with that. And yes, we will have them. I also wanted to acknowledge something else that happened, and then I'll acknowledge some of the people who supported us today. So.
The Mark Thompson Show.
The folk singer and Canadian poet laureate, I think he was a poet laureate of Canada, Gordon Lightfoot, passed away. 84 years old. There was a great, and it is still out there, documentary about Gordon Lightfoot. And you can find it, I think I streamed it on Amazon. It's on one of the streaming services. I'm almost sure it's Amazon. And it's really good. I really recommend it. Anyway, it walks you through the great life of Gordon Lightfoot, who he was as a poet, as a creator of music, and as this Canadian treasure. And his look, and there he is. That's the Gordon Lightfoot that I remember and that you remember. If You Could Read My Mind, Early Morning Rain, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, Sundown. These are all songs that dominated the charts in the 70s and 80s. And when you see this documentary, he doesn't look anything like that now. I mean, now he's passed away, but you know what I'm saying? Like, he was a very different looking guy. He had a very tough life. He suffered a nearly fatal abdominal aneurysm in 2002. And he had some pretty substantial health issues. That's actually a pretty good shot of him. He looks pretty good there. Mm-hmm. It's the case, though, that he was, celebrated in so many ways. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said in a statement, "We have lost one of our great singer-songwriters. Gordon Lightfoot captured our country's spirit in his music. And in so doing, he helped shape Canada's soundscape. May his music continue to inspire future generations, and may his legacy live on forever." It was called Gordon Lightfoot, If You Could Read My Mind. That was what I saw, the documentary. So I think you might enjoy it. It was because of COVID, it was, so many of you either have that album or are familiar with that album that Kim is showing right now. It never made it to theaters, so I recommend you check it out. Again, Gordon Lightfoot, If You Could Read My Mind. If you have an interest in this, but even if you just have a passing interest in music, it's a great biography, in effect. He wrote the song about his tumultuous extramarital and occasionally violent relationship with Kathy Smith. Years later, Kathy Smith admitted to injecting John Belushi with the heroin and cocaine speedball that led to his death at the age of 33. Its dark lyrics masked by a lilting, bluesy melody. Do you know the song I'm talking about, Gordon Lightfoot fans? Sundown. Sundown, you better take care if I find you've been creeping around my back stairs. Again, this is something that we could do in the meetup. I can't do it here on the main show on YouTube. I can't play you, but you know the music. I can't play you the music because of the copyright problems. But that Sundown album hit #1 in the U.S. and Canada. And by the way, that Kathy Smith passed away a few years ago, 2020. She was a backup singer on one of the tracks, High and Dry. She was on that album. 1975, his LP Cold on the Shoulder made the U.S. top 10. Rainy Day People was the big song from that. It reached the top 30. And The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Now, the thing about The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is that it was a real story. It really happened. A shipwreck on Lake Superior. 29 sailors actually died. But the other thing from a music and commercial standpoint that I think is particularly notable is that the song is what? It's long. It's 6 minutes long.
Ooh, that's bathroom break long.
Exactly, and it's also
For a
loathed
DJ,
by
right?
radio, loathed by radio programmers because they want to get more songs on so that they can get more commercials on. 3 songs and then a set of spots. So a 6-minute song wasn't viewed as very commercial, but it was huge. They actually trimmed 30 seconds from the album version. It still, though, was one of the longest singles to reach the U.S. top 5. It hit #2 for 2 weeks behind Rod Stewart's Tonight's the Night. So Gordon Lightfoot, he was remarkably creative. As I say, his lyrics, his music celebrated around the world. And he played for more than 2 hours in his North American tour at the Grove in Anaheim. He played more than 24 songs. He played for over 2 hours. I mention it because he was 80 years old then, and a guy who had suffered some pretty serious health issues.
He was still packing them in.
Exactly. He also dabbled in acting. He appeared in a 1988 episode of Hotel, among a few other credits. Lightfoot songs are heard in dozens of film and TV shows, they say, ranging from McCloud, James at 16, 54, to Supernatural, The Blacklist, Mr. Robot, Knives Out, and Licorice Pizza. Elvis Presley recorded his song Early Morning Rain. Bob Dylan once was quoted as saying, Lightfoot, every time I hear a song of his, I wish it would last forever. You can see in that picture that Kim has up, that's kind of the Lightfoot that's in the documentary that I mentioned. But he was celebrated. He's one of those guys who at least could enjoy the work that he did being taken in by so many, and so many who celebrated him and his creative efforts through the years. Remarkable and a sad loss. Gordon Lightfoot passes away.
There's never been anything like this.
As we talk about and think of the rigged and stolen election of 2020,
oh my God,
presidential election rigged and stolen.
Oh my God. Can't believe he got a town hall. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, there you have it. We must wrap. I do want to acknowledge a few people who stepped up and left us some contributions today because it really does help us get by. And those of you who are new on Patreon and PayPal, you are recognized. Tony puts that into the mix at the beginning of every week, I believe. Tony, it will be here on Thursday. We can double check that with him. But Wellington Smith. Wellington Smith sounds like a British, rather royal name as well, doesn't it? I poked it with a stick since I don't have an iron rod.
Smashed it with your iron rod.
Poking it with a stick.
Big
That's your
shout
shout out. Thank you, Wellington Smith. Andreas, we love you. Give them a raise and end the strike, says Andreas.
Big shout out.
Thank you for the 20. And Andreas, they are so far apart on this Writers Guild negotiation. I think this could be a long, long freeze out. We'll see. Gig working is low pay and not with long-term security. Exactly. Thank you, Andreas, with another super chat. And
big shout out.
Andreas is Hall of Fame. He is a great supporter. We love him. Is Andreas leaving the country or something? What, didn't you tell me he's going on vacation or something?
He might be, but I do know that he has a statue at the virtual Mark Thompson Terrace. Yeah.
Yes. Thompson Terrace is a circular overview in the metaverse, and there are statues from some of our biggest supporters, many of whom you can see in the scroll at the end of this show. And a prominent statue is to the great Andreas.
I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry.
And sometimes I do tear up when I talk about Thompson Terrace. Edward Lee, does AB5 affect writers? That's a great question/point. I would think it would, actually. I would think that as they are busted down to gig status, they would be affected. But I'll check that out for you. I don't really know the answer. So many of these kind of gigs fall through the cracks. Jim Slayton, it was great. I loved it. Yeah, it was great.
It was great. I loved it.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I thank you for the $10. Big shout out. Edward Lee for a couple of dollars. Phil, Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, or West Ham? Oh, I would have liked to have provided Phil with that question. Edward asked a question about footballers. Mark, we love you. Andreas, thank you. I'm not going to cry.
I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry.
But I appreciate that. Wow, Andreas really hit the ball today. Wow. Andreas, I'm going to give you a thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's very cool. Thank you, Andreas. You're just the best, sir. Thank you. Karen Jennings for thank you, Karen. Throwing in a couple of bucks in the virtual tip jar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Cheryl Massarelli. Thank you so much, Cheryl,
Thank
for
you
the
so
super
much.
sticker for $20. Thank you. Look, we need these contributions. Sadly, it does keep us in business. So thank you, Spencer, as
Big
well.
shout out.
And everybody who steps up and make contributions. And Deirdre Lozica at Lozica Concrete, $25. I'd love to join on Thursday, but it is during my daily Jeopardy battle with the hubby. It is true that our Thursday, we were trying to pick a time that was sort of a happy hour, but then we had to do it at 7 o'clock because I couldn't do it earlier. So we'll miss you, Deirdre. And I'm not going to cry.
Big shout out.
But I will tell you.
I'm not going to cry.
Lozica Concrete, you're so supportive. Thank you. And you almost bring me to tears. And John Schneider, come on. He's the Yoda of this show.
Thank you.
John will, he's a kind of a consultant to the show. He helps me with various decision making on how to do this, how to do that, how to expand the show. John's great. And for him to step up with a few dollars, I really appreciate that. Thank you, John. And Buck, Buck with the best name in the chat. Thank you, Buck. Well, it's been a great, fun show. The ambassador never. We had to move his time. We might have lost him in the shuffle.
Yeah.
I'll follow up on that. Oh, Randy has this in the question about the writers. California passed AB 2257 in 2020 that exempted freelance writers from AB 5.
Oh, okay.
Now, he asked the question, does that mean that these WGA writers would be exempted? I don't know. You know, you're seeing right now a sea change in the way writers and creatives in Hollywood and across the board, I'm just using Hollywood generically, are being compensated. They're trying to stonewall this union and essentially bust them all down to work for hire gig workers. So we'll have to see how it all goes, and we'll discuss it more in the weeks ahead.
Stevens for the Mark Thompson Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for joining us.
Out of time. Bye-bye.
Until tomorrow, bye-bye.